Okay, so we're going to look at some evergreen shrubs. There's quite a few out here. We'll hit the highlights. This first one right here, this is Distilleum. Now this is a relatively new-ish evergreen shrub that has shown up on the scene. I mean, 10 years ago I hadn't even heard of this plant, and now I've been seeing it more and more. I've seen it at every garden center. You can see it at Lowe's and Home Depot. There's different varieties. Well, I believe this variety is Vintage Jade. There's also Cinnamon Girl. There's one called Linebacker, I think, that has larger leaves. This is an evergreen shrub. It is, as far as identification, the biggest way I identify this one actually is the habit, the form of it. You see how it has these long branches that kind of arch up and over is one of the biggest things that I notice about it. It kind of, in the landscape, to me, it's kind of replacing, or it's a better choice to replace autoleucon cherry laurels, which tend to get shot hole fungus pretty bad. It kind of has that look. So far, I've been really pleased with this one. I believe this is its third summer here. As you can see, I planted it as a 3-gallon shrub, and it's grown, I mean, it has grown a fair amount, but it's not going to get much bigger than this. I believe it's 3 feet tall, 4 to 5 feet wide. Some of the other varieties get bigger, so that's why I went with this one. It is evergreen, like I said. We have got, as far as the leaves go, they're fairly nondescript. You've got these kind of almost lanceolate leaves come to a little tip. They are alternately arranged, as you can see here. You can see it's got like little new, I guess it's a little new leaf right there. Also the branching, see how these kind of come off 45 degree angle from the main stem? That's pretty typical. Like I said, this is a fairly new plant, so as far as long-term pest issues that it has or disease issues, I haven't really run up on anything yet. Every once in a while I kind of get these little yellowing leaves in the center, and that's just what's going to happen. So kind of like a gardenia in that sense. This one gets really full sun. They can do full sun to part shade. I imagine they do fine in more shade even. They might get a little bit leggier, but it's just a good, as far as in the landscape, it's just a good evergreen shrub. As far as maintenance goes with this one, because of this arching habit, and I'm going to say this over and over again, with a plant that has this arching habit, you do not want to shear this shrub because you're going to lose this form. This is not meant to be a little ball. It's meant to arch up and over, like a loropetalum or an abelia. So you might do a little bit of pruning, but also really, because the size of this plant is not going to get very big, you shouldn't have to prune it. I haven't had to touch these at all since I installed them a few years ago. So don't mess with this plant much. Just let it be happy. Make sure you're getting enough water. And other than that, it's pretty low maintenance. Our next evergreen shrub here, this is a camellia. This is a Sasanqua camellia. This one's a pretty large one. It's actually, 10 feet tall, I would suppose. Like I said, this is a Sasanqua. Sasanqua camellias bloom in the late fall or mid to late fall, dependent on the variety. This variety, I'm not sure what the name of it is. It has a pink flower, and the flower starts to show up about 1 to 2 weeks before Halloween for me. There are some other varieties that will bloom a little later. If it is a Japanese camellia or japonica, it's going to bloom more in the dead of winter, around January, February. Sasanquas tend to bloom in the fall. This is evergreen. For identification, when we look at the leaf, first off, it is alternate leaf arrangement, so 1 leaf per node. Also, if you look at the leaf itself, it does have a serration to the margins. The leaf shape is oval, and it has this little, almost a stretched out, like a drip tip. And you can kind of see, like here, you got the little tip, the way it arches over, like that. So, also we have got here, it's just now starting to form buds. This is going to be the flower bud here in a few months. Camellias, a few different things. They do get scale. Let's see if we can find some scale on this one. So it will get scale. You can see on this leaf right here, some T-scale. And it's not going to kill the plant unless you have a very large infestation of it. Mainly it's going to cause this chlorosis due to the stippling damage where the insect is sucking out the the chlorophyll. And here we have a hummingbird that's very mad at me. So mad. Because I am near his food. How dare me. He is so mad. Like I said, the different varieties is going to dictate how big it's going to get. There are actually some like Shishi Gashira that is more of a spreader. Now this one is more of an upright variety, whatever it is. I'm actually trying to espalier it on the side of the house there. And we'll see. It might work, it might not. Part shade. If it's full shade, it'll grow, but it might not flower as much. Though honestly, they can actually handle a fair amount of sun. This one gets sun from sunrise to about maybe 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon in the summertime. So that's full sun, really. That's why it's so dense, and the leaves are probably a little smaller than if it was in a shadier area. Our next evergreen shrub is gardenia. This is actually a dwarf gardenia, Gardenia radicans. The straight species like a daisy gardenia or frostproof are going to be bigger, and the leaf is going to be wider. So the leaf on these gardenias here is pretty, what I call lanceolate. Very thin, pinnate leafination, comes this little tip. A couple of ways that I identify gardenias. For one, the color. It's a very green, like in a nice way. Like it's not olive or dark, it's a very bright shiny green. The leaves are also very shiny and almost rubbery in the way that they kind of whirl towards the tip as well. A couple other things, it is opposite leaf arrangement, which you can kind of see there. Also, in the summertime, you're going to have some flowers. So white flowers in the summer sporadically. Pretty fragrant too, actually. You can see how it kind of, as it unravels there, right there. So that's mainly why this one is going to be found in the landscape, because of the flowers. It's very fragrant. These are about 15 feet from my front door, and I mean, the smell will about knock you off your feet when you step out in the morning. It is evergreen. They do take full sun. That's what the tag's going to say when you buy it, full sun. Though I have found, and this is just my anecdotal experience, that they don't like that afternoon sun. And these don't get that afternoon sun. This is on the east side of my house. So they get full sun once again up until about 2 or so, and then they're in the shade for that hot afternoon. One thing I found with dwarf gardenias is like they're either very happy or they're dead. These are pretty happy. Dwarf gardenias aren't going to get very tall. These, like I said, because these are very happy, they're probably about almost 3 feet tall, and I've had to trim them back a little bit. I think there's 3 in here. Got them growing together in a nice form. Here is our next evergreen shrub. This is spreading plum yew. Some people call it dwarf plum yew, or just yew. It is a plum yew. It's not a true yew. It's not a true taxus. This is cephalotaxus, I believe. And this is the spreading version. So this one kind of has this low spreading habit. I want to say in all total there's a grouping of 5 here. They've all grown together. And it's about 3 feet tall or so. Once again, the tag on these, it's going to say part sun. These pretty much get full sun, and they seem pretty happy for it. They seem to tolerate a bit more sun than what they're sold as. So these do pretty good. It is a conifer. It is evergreen. This is Evergreen Shrubs. The leaf are these little needle-like leaves. It's very soft, nice green. This is not like a juniper. You can touch it. It's not going to poke you. Sometimes you'll get these dead leaves here. I just need to come cut that out, or I could do that. Once again, it kind of also has this 45-degree angled branching here. It's pretty thick. Pretty low maintenance. It's conifer. It's not going to flower. What you're getting from this in the landscape is this evergreen foliage with this really nice ferny texture. It's not going to flower. It's not really going to have, I've never really found like wasp nests in it, like what you find with juniper. We always find a wasp nest. I have not found that with these. Once again, it could be anecdotally. And of course, here is Loropetalum, evergreen shrub, very popular. Now this one, it is a red leaf variety. As you can see, it has gotten pretty green. I believe that is because I planted these about 3 months ago, and it's still kind of working on settling itself in. So it's probably needing a little bit more fertilizer than what I've given it so far. You can see it has pushed out some newer leaves here that are red. So in general, the more sun, the more fertilizer, and the more red the red leaf varieties are going to be. There is a green leaf variety as well. I'm trying to remember the name of this one. Purple something. They're all purple something. It's evergreen as far as identification. And this one, the habit, you can't really see it because it's pretty new, but the habit will kind of have this arching overform, a lot like the Distilleum. This one is still establishing itself, so we don't really have that yet, though we're starting to think about it. The leaf itself, it's very, not fuzzy, but it's kind of scratchy, feels like a cat's tongue. And it is pretty oval, like a thumbprint shaped, pinnate. You can see an alternate leaf arrangement too. It's kind of, you can kind of hear that scratchiness to it. Once established, fairly tolerant of our heat and the amount of rain that we get. They do produce a bloom. It's mainly in the spring that's pink, and that's kind of showy, and they'll do it sporadically throughout the summer, but mainly while we plant these in the landscape is for that purple color, for the shape of it. Once again, these are kind of abused a little bit in the landscape. They will get sheared into balls, and that's not how they want to be. They want to have this arching over effect. So if these are in the right place, you shouldn't have to prune them at all. One of the problems is what they're marked as on their tags. Sometimes they get way, way bigger than what the tag says they're going to be, and you'll buy a variety that says it gets 2 to 3 feet, and then before you know it, it's 5 feet or something. So make sure that you're planting this in a place where it has a lot of room, because there still seems to be a lot of variation in size. Right here is Pittosporum. This is a fairly new plant. It is eventually going to get way bigger. It's probably going to be about every bit 6 to 8 feet. Just planted these a few months ago, and I have got a weed in it. Evergreen plant. This is Wheeler's dwarf. It's not the variegated Wheeler's dwarf, which is more popular. You see that more often. This is just the straight species Wheeler's dwarf. With Pittosporum, the main way I'm going to identify it, a couple of things. One, the leaf, it's very round, but it's wider at the tip than it is towards the base. You can especially see this with some of the older leaves, like this right here. See how it tapers down to a tip as you get towards the petiole. Also, the way that the leaves whirl around the tips is very Pittosporum-y. You can see it here with this branch in particular. See that? And they kind of gather towards the tips. There's some different varieties. Like I said, there's a variegated variety. These are salt tolerant. You see these down towards the beach a lot. They are not very tolerant of cold. In fact, I have lost some before due to some cold winters, and I am in zone 8A in Birmingham. So you go Birmingham south, you're going to see these a lot. You go up to North Alabama, they're probably not going to be able to handle the cold there. Good evergreen shrub. Fairly tolerant once established. This is another one of those, you really don't want to shear it. It does naturally do this little balled up form. It's not going to have an arching effect or anything, but if the leaves are so big, you're not going to want to shear this one. It doesn't get too much in the way of pests. Haven't had any problem with deer eating it as opposed to everything else around here, so that's nice. And here is our next evergreen plant. This is a holly. It's actually the only holly that I've actually got on my property, so we'll look at it. So this is an inkberry holly. Most hollies are evergreen. There are some deciduous ones, but this one is evergreen. It is called inkberry because it produces little black berries in the fall and winter. Not overly showy, but it's something. All hollies are going to have alternate leaf arrangement. So if we look, we see you've got a leaf, one leaf per node. All hollies are like that. That's going to be one of the telltale ways to tell that it's a holly versus something like a boxwood or an osmanthus. Now this is an inkberry. Like I said, it's going to get, about maybe 4 to 5 feet tall and wide eventually. Hollies in general are pretty tolerant. Heat, drought, water, shearing. The only thing that hollies really don't like is completely wet feet, though actually an inkberry can handle that pretty good. We see a lot of Chinese type hollies in the landscape, things like Nellie Brunner's, Nellie R. Stevens, Emily Brunner's, needlepoints, Burford hollies. All those are kind of the Chinese holly with that very stiff, needle-like leaf that's very pokey. This is softer. There's some others that are softer. Hollies are pretty tolerant, and they grow fairly fast, fairly easy to propagate. So you find these a lot in the landscape just because of there's not very much cost involved, and certainly not with maintaining them, really. Just once again, you want to put the right plant in the right place. A lot of those Chinese hollies, including dwarf Burford, can get very, very huge. I've seen dwarf Burford a story tall, and it has the word dwarf in its name, so don't just assume that that means it's going to stay super small. Carissas can be pretty small, but they'll still be like 3 to 4 feet if you let it. Let's look at some azaleas. This is a type of indica azalea. Once again, it's still fairly young. A lot of my plants are just newly planted. It was my project for the year. This is a variety that is called George Tabor. So it's going to have a pink bloom in the spring. Eventually, this is going to get probably 6 feet fairly easily, maintained at 6. It'll probably want to get higher. I've got a grouping here of about 5 that they'll hopefully eventually grow in together. Filtered shade. Filtered shade, these do get sun to about midday. I'm hoping that they'll kind of be able to handle it a little bit better. We'll see. It also kind of depends on eventually. I've got a tree here that's going to get bigger, so these may or may not make it. We'll see. Now, as far as pest issues go, a lot of times you're going to see an azalea and the leaf is going to look like this. You see how it kind of has that little whitish or yellowish color to it? That is lace bug damage. And if I flip over this leaf, and there we can see the insects and the frass, their poop that they've left. Now, it's not enough to kill the plant, but it's going to make it look not quite as green. I could be putting a insecticide on it, perhaps something like a neem oil. I just haven't done that. So you get this a lot in the south. It's just something that's going to happen. And the leaf, even if I spray the insects and get rid of them, the leaf isn't going to recover. It's going to be the new growth that's going to be nice and green. There is a variety or a group of indica azaleas, or one of the parents is an indica azalea, of encores, which is the newer azalea in the landscape, and they bloom multiple times a year, hence the name. They're a bit more popular. I do have a few here on the property. They also don't get quite as big as well, but same issues as far as the type of environment that they need, the lace bug issue that we have. One nice thing about azaleas in general, actually, is they can handle a good renewal pruning every now and again. In fact, sometimes they're probably better for it. Maybe once every 10 years or so, you can cut these suckers back just about to the ground, and then they'll fluff out and be perhaps all the happier for it. Just don't shear these. Let's not shear these. They still, I mean, they're going to stay a nice roundish shrub. Just don't shear them. You can prune them a little bit. Just put them in the right place where it's okay that they want to get to the size that they want to get to. Here's our next evergreen shrub. This is anise. Some people say anise. I learned anise. Lycium parviflorum, Lycium floridanum, all of those. Here is the leaf. It's kind of the way I identify this one. The leaf itself, it's fairly large, so it's bigger than an azalea leaf. This is probably about 4 inches long or so. And that main mid vein is this very nice bright green, whereas the rest of the veins, you kind of blend in with the rest of the blade of the leaf. Also, the way that the leaves sit on the branch, they kind of stick up. And this one's a little bit thirsty, and I think a deer's been eating at it. And that's why it looks like that. So, green stems until you go pretty much this is the new growth from this year. You can see the previous year is this brown. Alternate leaf arrangement until you get to the tips, and it's almost more like a whorl around the tips. Has a little flower. Sometimes it's strap shaped. This one, there's this right there, and then it'll produce the anise fruit, the star-shaped fruit, which it's starting to do right there. And it's like what you use in a lot of like Asian dishes and pho and things like that. It's pretty good, kind of like licorice. And that's another thing you can do to identify it. Both the leaf, like with the petiole, where the petiole meets the stem, and the leaf itself, if you crack it and smell it, it smells like licorice, that, the black jelly bean, which is not my favorite thing, but it's very fragrant in that sense, and that's one way that you can identify it. Needs a little bit of shade. I've seen them in full sun, though I think they do better with a little bit of shade. These get probably about, maybe just 3 hours of direct sun. It's mainly a filtered shade area right here. Got a few more evergreen plants for you. This is Fatsia. Fatsia japonica. Just planted a little while ago, like a month. It's going to get bigger. It's probably going to get 4 or 5 feet tall and wide. It has a very large, and it's going to get larger than this as it gets more established, large palmately lobed leaf, palmate venation, very coarse serration, needs a fair amount of shade. It's in the sun right now, and it probably is in the sun like for about like an hour or so, right in midday. And then after that, it's in the shade, and it's doing okay so far. Newer growth is lighter green and glossier. Older growth is darker. Has a very nice, coarse, large texture. Kind of has that tropical feel. You go much north than Birmingham, it's probably going to need a bit more protection from the cold. Hopefully this one will make it. I just put it in, but so far it seems doing all right. And this guy right here, he is a banana shrub, Michelia figo. Got 3 of them right here. Eventually he's going to be pretty big. Called a banana shrub because when it does have its bloom, it kind of smells like bananas. It's related to a magnolia. It's close to a magnolia, and mainly how you're going to identify it. It's kind of hard to identify, honestly. It's fairly nondescript leaf, entire margin, little tip to it. You can kind of see these new buds. See how it's kind of fuzzy? A lot of magnolias will do that. And eventually this will be kind of a little hedge deal. That speckledy stuff on the leaf is actually cayenne pepper that I have put out here because I have got some crazy deer and they have been eating on a lot of things. In fact, you can kind of see I planted a ghost pepper over there, and the deer like ate most of it off. I'm surprised it didn't give them upset stomach actually, because it's pretty hot pepper. But they haven't touched these yet, so that's good. Evergreen, part shade, I would say. It can handle some sun. It might can handle full sun. It might suffer the first year though. Alright, and that's what I've got for evergreen shrubs. So I'll end this video here, and then I'll make one probably a little bit later on the deciduous shrubs. It's pretty hot out here. It is mid-July in Alabama at midday. So, time to go back inside.